This is Ed Pullen, your host on the Banter podcast, where birders talk birding. I'm back from Morocco. I hope you had a chance to listen to some of the one-take, no-edit episodes that I put up while I was there. I had fun doing that, and I hope you have fun listening to them. After getting back, I took off for the coast. Bruce LaBar and I led a trip for the Grays Harbor Shorebird Festival, and on a bus with 35 or 40 people, we cruised to some of the local areas on the coast, Bottle Beach, Tokeland, and had some good birds. The festival was in full swing, and the birds were there. Grays Harbor is a special place. There are two big areas on each coast that almost all of the migratory shorebirds that breed in the Arctic stop over at. And Grays Harbor is one of them on the west coast. It's right here in Washington. It's only an hour and a half or so from where I live. And it's a big, shallow bay that exposes vast mudflats. And on those mudflats, the birds stop over and fatten up. They gain 40 to 50% of their body fat in a short stopover of a few days before they take off for the Copper River Delta, which is their next big stopover. There's always a hurry in the spring, so they tend to come all around the same time. They're rushing to get to the Arctic to breed during the short window of opportunity they have to breed there. We found really good birds this year. We had a Baird sandpiper, which is unusual on the coast in spring. We had the snowy plovers right at the very northern end of their range at the Grayland State Park beach access, and had a good trip. The birds were in at Bottle Beach at high tides. Everybody got really good looks at the common birds, red knots, and dunlin, western sandpipers, short-billed archers, black-bellied plovers. It was a really good trip. I have a lot of photos from that on the birdbanter.com site. You can check out my blog post. I put it up after I got back yesterday, so you can check that out there. I'm excited also to have Art Wang as my guest today. But before I get into that, I want to ask you to please leave a review and a rating on the iTunes Store or wherever you get your podcast feeds. It really helps the Bird Banter podcast to have ratings and reviews there, because that helps iTunes and the other platforms know that there are really people who care and listen. So if you care and listen, leave a review and a rating. That will help out, and I'll be very grateful. Art is a local birder. He's also a local activist. I've really been impressed by Art over the years. His political activism, his conservation activism, and his leadership in the community have been real assets. And I've always looked up to Art for that. So I'm excited to talk a little about that today with him and to hear about his birding story. So here we go with the Bird Banter Podcast, episode number 14 with Art Wang. Welcome, Art. Thanks for coming over today. I really appreciate it. Art's a neighbor. He just had to walk up the street to come over to my place to record this, so it made it really easy. And Art, one of the things that I've always admired about you and found remarkable is that you've somehow found a way to be an activist and yet a nice guy without being an obnoxious activist in lots of areas. I've been involved in little things with Planned Parenthood and some political events and that sort of thing, but most especially with Audubon things. Tell me about how your experience with Audubon. I know you're on the National Board of Trustees.
Audubon Board, yes.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, actually, I've been a political junkie and a birder since I was a kid. So I've done both and I'm 7 years old now. So it's been a long time. I started when I was 12 years old, and probably in both about that same age. So it's been a long time. And I find that they actually go together and complement each other in many respects. Certainly National Audubon has become more of a force for advocacy, especially in these times. It's necessary to do so.
For sure.
And that's one of the things that we've tried to do. We just had memorial services recently for Helen Engel, who is also a remarkable activist who did tremendous amounts to save the environment. And one of the things that she succeeded, she was really a community organizer in many respects, but she did not particularly have money to do things, but just was able to do things with getting people together. She was the person who really turned Norm Dix into the hardcore environmentalist and person who, as chair of the Interior Appropriations Committee and things like that, made a huge difference in funding for environmental causes. So environmental interest and activism can go together, and in many respects.
We certainly had some fabulous mentors in that regard. Helen and others in Audubon have been spectacular. Yeah. So what is the role? What is it? I know you were recently the president of Tahoma Audubon a couple of years ago.
Yes.
And tell me, what does that involve? I mean, what would somebody be buying off when they do that? And then get into what it involves being on the national scene.
Well, I've been on the board of both the local chapter Tahoma Audubon and been president, as you said. And there it's a much smaller hands-on board as compared to the National Audubon Board, which is a bigger group and where it's clearly staff-driven. I mean, it's a $100 million organization. It has to be staff-driven. And so a very different dynamic there. With the local chapter, which you're doing, even though we do have staff, you're involved hands-on and almost in so many projects and things, whether it's conservation work, whether it's advocacy, whether it's education. I lead field trips regularly, do things like that, Christmas bird counts, all that type of stuff. At the national level, it's very different. You're more of a policymaker, but even there, on a very broad sense, you have input into things like the strategic plan, stuff like that. But it's a much broader scale, and where clearly it's staff driven.
Okay, so you go to meetings several times a year?
We have 3 national board meetings a year. And so they're scattered around in various places.
Good birding places?
Oftentimes they're good birding places. I've taken advantage of them to go birding and do different things. Usually, I mean, you have to pay your own way, so it's an expensive proposition being on the board in many respects. But for example, in January we're in Florida, so I took several days off to before the meeting in this case or before and after to do some birding in Florida in the Everglades and so forth, and so was able to track down 3 new species for myself. And,
very nice. A 3-lifer board trip. That's good.
Yeah.
Good. And I know you've been active in a lot of things. You were a state legislator and other sorts of activism. Do you have any suggestions to people who want to get involved as maybe an environmental activist? Or how does a person even begin? I mean, I have zero experience. I mean, I go to almost none.
Well, I would get involved just by finding out locally or first of all, just figure out what matters to you. If it's climate change, if it is saving a local birding spot, so it can go from the very global scale, but never like climate change to a very local scale, like saving a local birding spot. But find what something is of interest to you, and find others who are, there often is a group involved with it. Certainly there are lots of groups involved with climate change, for example, or even with saving local places. Audubon is often a good place to do it with your local chapter. But find a local group and get involved with others. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can find others who are also involved with things.
I know you're trained as an attorney, I think, aren't you? Didn't you go to law school? Has that background been really helpful to you in some of your endeavors, or is it more just learning as you go?
Legal background was helpful in the legislature when I was a legislator. It's not particularly, well, it's helpful in some things. I mean, certainly I'm on the Environmental Litigation Committee, as an example, with National Audubon. And so certainly legal background is helpful there. I've also been a judge, so that also helps to just have that kind of experience as well.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of flip a little bit. You've been birding since you were 12 or young. How did you get into birding?
Well, there was a National Audubon store that existed at that time in Berkeley, California, where I was growing up. And it was a retail store, but it was also kind of a little bit like a center in having educational things. And it was a very funky kind of thing. It wasn't like a modern retail store. It was more like a used bookstore kind of thing, that kind of ambience and feel to it. And so somehow I would end up hanging out there. And then from there, I would, at age 12, I was interested in nature stuff, but decided, I better specialize and learn something specific.
Oh gosh, forward-thinking 12-year-old.
Or neurotic. But anyway, So I decided, okay, I'll learn something about birds. And so I'd actually, I think, been to a Asilomar at one of their conventions before that, and just even as a 12-year-old helping out with things. And I'd met Roger Torrey Peterson at that time.
Oh, wow.
But decided, okay, I'd go on birding trips with Golden Gate Audubon. And that opened up a whole new world to me because I'd really never been on field trips before. My parents came from China. They weren't particularly into camping, nature types of things, outdoor activities.
Right.
And so it was a whole new world for me. So it was exciting to do. On the second trip, I think we even found a rare bird, and so that was an eastern kingbird in California on Bayshore Island in
Very
Alameda,
nice.
California, and so
And even an easy to identify rare bird.
Yeah.
That's even better.
Yeah, and so that was kind of got me hooked on some of that aspect as well.
The chasing stuff. Good.
Yeah.
So you started out with the local Audubon group and taking some field trips. I know that you grew up in California in the hotbed of modern day birding.
Right.
So I bet you met some cool people.
Yeah. No. It was really an exciting time in California. Paul de Benedictis became more of a scholar in terms of doing a lot of taxonomy and types of things for the AOU. Was one of my mentors at that time. Rich Stallcup was one of my closest friends. He and I used to go and he was like my brother. He
A
would,
legend in birding too. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was. So he and I would travel around, and I would stay at his place and stuff. In fact, he and Ron Lavalier later shared a house with me in Monterey or in Carmel Valley. But Guy McCaskey, who was also another legend of California birding, I've known him since I was 13 years old or something like that. And in fact, just a year ago in January, I went got to go with Guy to the Salton Sea again. So we spent a day at the Salton Sea, which was kind of neat.
Yeah.
He's
That's
in his 80s
isn't that
now,
like his patch almost?
Exactly. That's his specialty. Dave DeSanti was also a close friend, and we'd go around running around like crazy. I remember one time, I think we went to Honey Lake in northeastern California, decided there weren't any birds there, and over a weekend, and so we drove to San Diego.
Just a little side
had
trip.
4 flat tires during the course of it, or something like that. But anyway, those are some of the crazy things that we would do in those days. Gene and Nancy Hunn, who later moved to Washington State,
Right.
and
I didn't know he started in California. Okay.
Yeah, and he's back there.
I
now.
know he's there now. Yeah.
Right. So those were some of the people.
Yeah. Did any particularly memorable trips you took while you were in those days?
It was fun going to things like Rich and I, and driving Rich's girlfriend's fancy car, a Lincoln Continental or something of that sort, went to Arizona. So this must have been 1964, so I would have been 15 years old. And
So he was a year or two older, had a driver's license.
oh, he was quite a bit older.
Oh,
than me.
I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, but nevertheless, anyway, it was quite an adventure going to Arizona with Rich. He was always trying to do whatever he could to corrupt me in various ways. So I succeeded. So,
He had a
yeah.
good plastic to mold. It sounds like cool. So Art, you've been birding for a long time. It seemed like, and maybe I'm way off base, that you kind of melted into the background of the local birding scene for a while. I think you're busy with a lot of other stuff probably, but
Right.
You've kind of exploded back in the scene in the last few years. I see you all the time, and we're out doing stuff.
Well, yeah, I was busy. I mean, being in the legislature, raising a family, and doing things like that. So
I can relate to that.
yeah, there was I was a hardcore birder back when I was a teenager and growing up in California. Went to college, didn't do that much in college in the East. Then came back to the Monterey area. Was again a hardcore birder in the Monterey area for several years. moved to Washington State and as a Vista volunteer, actually,
Oh, okay.
at Tacoma Community House through the Tacoma Urban League, and was a birder here for and more hardcore for the first several years here. But then, particularly as I became involved with the legislature, was elected to the legislature and things, would do things like basically just go on a Christmas bird count once a year, doing things like that for a period of time. And then as family grew up, as I left elective politics and things, had a little bit more time, and so got back into doing something that I loved, which is going out and looking at birds.
Sure. That's cool. That's cool. I know family and work, and I've struggled with those commitments over the years too. I've managed to keep going to some degree, but it is off and on. Yeah, so that's pretty normal, I think. Art, excuse me. Have you found any things I know you bird quite a bit on Ruston Way. What are your local patches? What do you do locally here?
I don't really have an organized local patch as much. I do a fair amount just in walking on Ruston Way because I live so close to it and stuff. But just I do a monthly bird trip at Point Ruston, which has also been kind of nice to do. But I don't really have a particular spot that I go to spot. I mean, I go to Goggly Heidi at times, but
Sure. The world's ugliest great birding spot,
right.
I think. Yeah.
But I don't really have an area here in the same sense that I did it in Monterey. I would go to Point Pinos, and when I lived in Berkeley, I would go to Point Reyes. So on the coastal kinds of things, so I don't have that nearly as much as I did when I was in California way back when.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is special about you and your family is your son Alex has become quite an ornithologist and birder. What was it like growing up with a birder as a kid?
Well, he wasn't a birder as a kid.
Oh.
He it was one of those things where I would drag him along periodically. He and my daughter, I would drag them along to different things, but they, of course, hated it.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah. My kids were the same way.
And yet, nevertheless, Alex then went to college at UC Santa Cruz and ended up taking a field course in ornithology and in birds, and discovered that he knew more than anybody else. He was really good at it, and he loved it. And so it was a wonderful,
reawakening.
Yeah. So he became passionate about it, and it's ironic because my daughter has absolutely follows her mother and has no interest in birds whatsoever. But Alex became really dedicated to birds, and in fact, one of the great things also is that he started his first job after graduating from college was at Point Reyes Bird Observatory, PRBO, now Point Blue, which literally working in the same building where I had worked when I was 17 years old.
That is cool.
So
that is cool. You said you had some early work experiences involving birding and conservation. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, my very first job, most kids, had paper routes back in those days and things like that. But no, I stuffed birds. I prepared study skits.
Oh, cool.
For the Lawrence Hall of Science. So I would get paid by the piece for preparing study skits for the Lawrence Hall of Science. And then my first real job, where you had Social Security deducted and things of that sort, was actually at Point Reyes Bird Observatory, where I was which is now this enormous enterprise and things on a worldwide basis, but in those days was still new. I was the only staff person, so I was the just on a temporary basis, but I was still the resident biologist.
This is in high school or college?
This is I think I was in college at the time, but I was 17 years old and just acting as that, but living as the person who was at the Palomar Station and being the staff person for PRBO. So that was pretty amazing.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's
your son kind of following in those footsteps after a roundabout way of getting there.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
cool.
No. And then now he's at in the state of Hawaii for the Natural Area Reserve System. So he's working with a lot of endangered species. He's involved with release of Alala, the Hawaiian crow, and Palila, so various endangered species. He's also doing a lot of work with trying to find nesting sites of Hawaiian shearwaters and things like that. So
cool stuff.
Yeah,
definitely cool stuff. So you've probably had some good Hawaiian birding experiences visiting him.
I have. It's been fun to do. I've actually, so I'm probably one of the few people who's had contact with the alala since they've been released. I've just heard it flying by, but nevertheless, when I was out banding with him, but that was kind of neat to do. Just things like going banding with him. It's kind of funny there because back again when I was a kid, that I would be in my teens. I had my own master banding permit in those days, or there wasn't a distinction. It was just a banding permit. Yeah, and as well as a collector's permit. So because in those days you did a lot of collecting with with actually taking birds, shooting birds, and things. It seems so distant now, but
but it was a standard ornithological procedure.
It was a standard procedure back then, and so. Now those things are much more restricted, but I'm kind of amazed when I think back that those are permits that I had when I was 17, 18 years old or something like that.
Yeah. So and then you said you had some jobs after you came up to Washington on a.
I came up as a Vista volunteer.
Vista volunteers. That's in my ancient memory somewhere.
It was considered the domestic version of the Peace Corps, and it's now been succeeded by AmeriCorps.
That's right.
So people are more familiar with it as AmeriCorps now.
Okay, what did you do with that?
I worked with the Asian American community at Tacoma Community House, and so that was a new thing. It was since 1973. It was new to me. My background is Chinese American. I'm second generation,
sure.
but the term Asian American really hadn't even been in use or invented until about the early 1970s or so. And so it was the first time experience working with the Asian community. That's just as an aside, one of the things that that's been of concern with the birding community and the environmental movement in general has been that, of course, that
lack
of diversity,
lack of minorities,
lack of minorities. It's been interesting when I went to McGee Marsh again on a side trip from one of the Audubon board meetings that McGee Marsh in Ohio, it's this famous boardwalk known for
the greatest week in birding.
Greatest week in birding, and also warblers and different migrants and things. But I was amazed to see there probably more diversity there just walking around than anywhere I've ever been birding.
Really?
Just in terms of probably seen more Asian birders there, more African American birders there, certainly more handicapped birders there. I saw 4 people in wheelchairs.
It would be a great place to handicap bird. I mean, it's boardwalk and you can get around. It's set up for that.
It's set up for that, and they make a conscious policy of that. But there were, it could literally, from one standing in one point on the boardwalk, I could look in 3 different directions and see 3 different birders in wheelchairs. So
that
was pretty amazing.
That's pretty cool.
Not to mention the religious minorities also that were there, so Amish and things like that. So it's pretty remarkable, and I wish that kind of diversity there could exist here. It's just I know there have been many attempts to do. I'm involved in attempts to do that, to encourage that.
Didn't I see just on your Facebook page something about like a day or 2 ago, something to that effect? Maybe there's been a local park, or
there's been a group that Tacoma Audubon sponsored a group that's been trying to promote bird walks for people of color, especially.
That's what I saw.
And so I've been participating with those, just trying to help out with those. I'm not the lead on those, but I'm just trying to help out with those.
That sounds like you, helping out. Yeah. Always helping out. Good for you. So do you have visions of what your birding's going to look like in the next few years, or do you even think about that too much?
Well, I'm still trying to get to 700 in the Continental
in the old ABA.
Oh, the old ABA. I'm at 761 on the on the overall ABA now, but I'm still trying to get to 700. I'm still three short, I think.
Well, I'm footloose. If you need somebody to go with, just give me a yell.
Okay.
I'm ready to chase.
Yeah, so I still need to get a few things there. I've never been much for doing birding with tours and organized tours and stuff, but I'm getting older now, and it really would be helpful to do, and so I might do some more of that. Which is not
festivals
something
are
I've done.
another way to do that, I think. Festivals are another way to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've never been big on doing festivals because I've always found that
Neither have I. Yeah.
I've always found that I enjoyed birding much more in a small group rather than big mob scenes and so forth. And so
I feel the same.
So that's been one of the reasons why. Also, as you said, I was not as visible with different things. I do tend to go out alone with a small group, but much more so than with big groups of people.
It's been fun having you on some of the ABC trips, that Ken leads and other people. So you're definitely a strong addition to the spotters and identifiers.
It was nice to go on. I took Ken's class a few years ago, and so that was because I'd never taken, even though I've been doing birds for all these years, I'd never taken an actual class. So it was fun to take Ken's class and go on some of the field trips with the group, with a group of people like that.
Yeah, besides learning the birds, it's just finding the areas in the state. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's some spectacular places to bird in Washington that, if you're not a birder, you've never been there.
No, you've never known about places that.
Little Pend Oreille and the Okanagan in the winter and Skagit and places like that are just really good birding.
Yeah.
Really good birding. So you said you haven't been on a lot of tours. I'm just going to pop in. I just got back from a tour to Morocco.
Right.
And it's only the second guided tour, except with friends, that I've ever done. And it is a whole different world of birding. I mean, going to out of the country where you don't know the birds and having, to some degree, going with a guide who says, see that bird up there? That's such and such. See that bird over there? That's such and such, which is cool, but it's just not birding to me. It's different. It's not going out and looking and seeing a flicker in the bushes and trying to figure out what it is. So that's kind of the joy and adventure of birding. It's just different when you're on a guided trip. So.
Right. I went on a guided trip in Colombia a couple of years ago, and that was the first time I'd really done something like that, and it was a different experience in doing that.
How long was that trip? Was it?
It was about 10 days or something like that. So.
It can be intense.
Yeah.
It can be intense. Yeah, especially jungle birding or tropical birding where there are little bright things up in the leaves you can barely see. It's
right.
It's got to be exhausting. I haven't really done one in the tropics yet, but that's on my to-do list. And I think there's almost have to take a guided trip down there unless you know the tropical birds. It's really difficult to just go out and find things and identify them if you don't know the calls.
It certainly helps to know the sounds. That makes a huge difference. Alex, my son Alex, and I actually did Costa Rica together without a guide at all, or with just sometimes we'd have local guides, but that was fun to do and worked out pretty well. Yeah, Costa Rica has a good infrastructure for doing things. Colombia does not yet, so a guide is really helpful there.
My daughter lives in Costa Rica, and so I'll have to touch bases with you more about how you pull that off, because I visited once, and I'm obviously going to visit again, and kind of fitting some birding in around that is in my plans.
Right. Panama was actually a lot harder, I found, as a place than Costa Rica, just because of infrastructure.
Oh, so you've been to Panama too? Did you go to the?
Alex and I went there as well.
Oh, it's part of the trip.
No, separately.
Oh, separate,
different year.
Doesn't Panama have the canopy places? What are they called?
Yes, it does. I mean, we did not stay at places like that when we were trying to do things on our own and things in it, but found it was generally harder to do in Panama. Just didn't have some of the infrastructure. For example, on one of the famous roads in Panama for birding, you would have to have a car going along behind. You would have to bird on the roadway itself.
Couldn't get off the road.
You'd have a car going along behind you to protect you from being hit or something of that sort. Yeah. So
a little bit of just a logistical challenge and not quite as much fun. I mean, when you're feeling that endangered and restrained, I would think.
Right.
Good. So, have you had any kind of bloopers? I always try to ask people, have you had times where things just like went all to hell in a handbasket? Just things didn't work out the way you thought it might be funny. Can you think of anything? Okay.
Nope. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Didn't set you up for that very well. That's okay. That's okay. Do you have any advice to young birders? How to get going or get involved or?
I started out by going on some just Golden Gate Audubon field trips. So Audubon field trips are an okay way to start. I quickly discovered that it was actually better for me to get in with a group of local people who were just hardcore birders and things, and more my peers.
Right.
And so I ended up doing that mostly.
But you probably met some of them or heard about some of them on some of them. I mean, it was a foot in the door.
Right, exactly. It was a foot in the door getting started with the local Audubon chapter.
Good. Do you have any special? You said you're 3 more to get to 700. What do you think is next for you?
Well, there's some odd, easy ones to get, just oddball things that that would be relatively
Probably
easy.
Places.
Yeah, the trouble is you have to go to a specific.
Have you been to Alaska?
I've been to Alaska, yeah, but there are still several things I've not been to. Some of the specialty areas in Alaska. There are also things that I need mourning warbler, which is relatively easy. I need gray vireo, another oddball thing that's easy, but just have to go to the right area.
Easy is relative, yes, for both of those. But you're right. Yeah. They're gettable, for sure. Good. So, Art, I know you've been, you do the Grays Harbor bird count and the local bird count, Christmas bird counts. You've been kind of a big participant in Christmas bird counts. Tell me some of your CBC experiences.
Yeah, I've been doing Christmas bird counts since 1961, so the first year I started.
Gosh,
so it's pretty amazing. So, that's, 57 years of Christmas bird counts. I probably missed 1 or 2 years in there, but on the other hand, I probably do average 2 or 3 per year.
So you're in triple digits for your CBCs?
Yeah, probably, yeah. It actually was kind of funny. The one time I've been in Time magazine, of all things.
Oh, my goodness.
Was in 1961 when I saw when they just did a 3-paragraph blurb on Christmas bird counts, and they said this 12-year-old saw a slate-colored junco. At that time, it was a separate species.
Right.
In Berkeley, California, or on the Oakland, California bird count. So that was just one of those little odd things that they pitch into us.
And they took it away with a lump later.
They took it away with a lump later, but yeah. But that was...
It got you in Time magazine.
It got me in Time magazine. I've actually added 2 species to the Christmas bird count list that had never been seen before, which seems kind of funny now, but then called the slender-billed shearwater. It was now the short-tailed shearwater, but was the first time it was ever seen on a Christmas bird count was back in the 60s.
Were you on a pelagic?
No, it was
off
Tamales Point in at Point Reyes.
Wow. So you must have had a pretty good look. That's not an easy bird to identify.
No, but although...
Sooties not around that time of year so much?
Sooties are not around very much at that time of year. So that's part of it there. Yeah. And then thick-billed kingbird was another one that had never been... As far as I know, it never actually been seen in the winter in the United States.
Wow. What CBC was that at?
San Diego.
Oh, in San Diego. Gosh, okay.
So I was doing the San Diego count for Guy McCaskey, and in those days, in the that might have been the early 70s. So those were 2 that they've added. But it's been kind of neat to know that I've done over 50 years of Christmas bird counts.
So you're listening to birding history here. A guy who found two new CBC species. That's pretty cool. And you had mentioned another thing you wanted to talk about, Art. Help me remember. I'm blanking here.
I was going to say that when we talk about going into birds and stuff as a profession, as opposed to doing things as an interest, as a side interest, as I've done. I had originally thought about going into birds as a profession, and of course, this is back in the 60s and days of relevance and all that type of stuff. And I ended up with some stereotypes that I think were wrong at the time, where my stereotype of ornithologists in those days was that they were so narrowly focused on things, which can certainly exist.
I mean, research in general needs to be fairly narrowly focused, but you're right.
But that they would not be a Ned Johnson at the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology, who was known for his work on Impidonyx flycatchers, or a Dick Maywalt, who was known for his work on white-crowned sparrows. And I would think of them as being, with Maywalt, he would be so focused on that, he would, if there were any other bird, he wouldn't even pay attention to it.
He wouldn't see the other bird fly by. Yeah.
He wouldn't see the other bird. And that was the stereotype. When I think back on it, wait a minute. This is the guy who founded Point Reyes Bird Observatory. That's a pretty broad, all-encompassing kind of thing. It was, yes, he may have been interested in white-crowned sparrows, but there was more to him than that. And that I think I was being too short-sighted in thinking about some of the ornithologists that, and these were academics that I had known in those days, and thinking that they were too narrowly focused on things. Dave DeSanti is another example of a person who was an academic and who became now with the Institute for Bird Populations and things like that, that had a much broader impact and broader interests.
Okay, good. Art, I'm gonna do a little shout out. Art along with Marcus Ronig this is kind of completely off topic, but are doing their birdathon this coming weekend, I think, aren't you?
On May 11th.
May 11th, so, and if you want to support Art's birdathon, you can just go. You probably have a page on the Audubon website for that, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, so you can just go to the Toma Audubon website and look for Art and Marcus's birdathon and contribute to that. Toma Audubon will be grateful for anything you contribute. Good.
As will I.
Yeah, and that's good. I'll make sure I do that. I've kind of fallen through and haven't done a birdathon this year, so I'll have to contribute to yours instead. That'll work. But anyway, that's great. Any other things, Art, that you wanted to talk about today?
No, I think that'll do it. I think we've gone on long enough, but thanks. I've enjoyed doing this. It's been a fun part of the... it's nice to talk about birds and incorporating some history as part of that as well.
It is fun. It is fun. Thanks so much, Art. You have a great day, good birding, and take care.
Thank you.
So check the podcast notes. I'll leave a link to Art's fundraising page for the Toma Audubon Birdathon. Anything you can do there will help. Also, remember to leave a review and a rating on the iTunes Store or wherever you get your podcast feeds. That really helps me be recognized there, and the Bird Banter podcast get recognized. I appreciate that. Thanks for listening, and until next time, good birding, good day.